My name is Emma Richardson. I'm 29, and I live in Portland, Oregon. The day I stepped into my mother-in-law's living room and saw her clutching an empty jewelry box, the ground shifted beneath me. Lisa said I gave them to her, Margaret whispered, her voice small, uncertain. My stomach tightened. Hours later, when the house was quiet, I opened my laptop and pulled up Multnomah County property records. What I found didn't just startle me, it froze my blood. Margaret's house, valued at $890,000, was no longer in her name. The deed had been transferred 3 weeks earlier, signed and notarized. Margaret hadn't the faintest idea. Cinematically, I remember the details with razor-sharp clarity. Margaret's living room smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The curtains swayed in a draft. She sat in her chair, frail but proud, her hands trembling around the jewelry box, as if it were the last fragile piece of her life. Her confusion wasn't just forgetfulness. It was fear. Confessionally, I should tell you this wasn't entirely a surprise. Margaret had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 6 months ago. She could still cook her own breakfast, hold conversations, and manage most daily tasks. But memory slipped away from her in unsettling fragments. Sometimes she repeated herself. Sometimes she misplaced things. Still, she was independent enough that no one, least of all her, believed she was vulnerable. Except Lisa. Lisa, my sister-in-law, was 38 and carried a trail of financial wreckage behind her. Gambling losses, 2 failed marriages, debts that never seemed to disappear. She had moved back from Seattle under the guise of helping Mom. But her help came with a hidden ledger. I had been the one close by, driving 20 minutes twice a week to help Margaret with groceries and medication. I noticed the small disappearances first. Her gold watch, a handful of cash. Each time Margaret insisted she'd misplaced them. I wanted to believe her. But that empty jewelry box told me I couldn't. When I asked about the house transfer, Margaret blinked, bewildered. What transfer? Lisa said they were medical forms. That was the moment a quiet dread settled inside me. Later, staring at the notarized deed, I zoomed in on the date. A Tuesday afternoon. I remembered calling Margaret that very day. She told me Lisa had taken her downtown to sign some papers. My hands shook. It wasn't care. It was theft, disguised in family trust, and I realized Lisa hadn't just stolen a house. She was stealing Margaret's reality. Telling David wasn't an option. He was in combat, and the last thing he needed was a crisis from home gnawing at him. This was mine to carry and mine alone. The next morning, I sat at Margaret's kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the worn linoleum, her teacup rattling faintly in her hands. She blinked at me, bewildered. "Emma, I don't remember signing anything," she whispered. Her face was sincere, but the deed I'd seen the night before said otherwise. I started digging. Margaret had given me access to her phone bills months earlier so I could help her manage payments. Page after page showed the same thing. Lisa calling 4 or 5 times a day, almost on schedule. The text messages were worse. Short, sharp commands written as reminders. "Remember, Mom, you promised." We already talked about this. Each one felt like a seed planted in soil that could no longer resist weeds. I drove to the notary office listed on the deed. The clerk remembered them. She hesitated when I asked questions, then admitted Margaret seemed confused. But Lisa had leaned across the desk, confident, insistent, steering the entire appointment. "She said her mom was fine," the clerk muttered, guilty. That confirmation stayed with me like a bruise. Even the safeguards had failed. I went home and pored over Oregon's elder abuse statutes until midnight. Financial exploitation wasn't just wrong, it was a felony. But suspicion wouldn't hold up in court. I needed undeniable proof, the kind no lawyer could dismiss. So I built my own case. Every visit to Margaret's house, I documented. I photographed the scattered bills, the misplaced jewelry boxes, the empty wallet. I recorded her voice when she repeated questions, when she stumbled through memories. Oregon law allowed one-party consent. That protection was mine. And then I took a step that changed everything. With Margaret's hazy but verbal permission, I installed a small camera in her kitchen. She didn't really understand, but she nodded, and I told myself it was enough. When the light blinked once, then disappeared, I felt both guilty and resolved. Weeks later, I sat in my living room watching the footage. My chest tightened as Lisa slid a stack of papers across the kitchen table. "Mom, just sign these bank forms. You want me to help in emergencies, right?" Margaret, exhausted, nodded and scribbled her name. I pressed pause and stared. Lisa had just secured access to $340,000 in bank accounts. Days later, at a neighborhood barbecue, Lisa appeared in a sleeveless dress flashing a brand new Cartier bracelet. When the neighbor admired it, Lisa laughed. "Mom insisted I take her jewelry. She doesn't wear it anymore." My eyes flicked to Margaret. She looked almost ill, lips parting as if to object, then closing again. The lie stood. Reality was being rewritten in front of everyone, and no one but me saw it happening. That night, my phone rang. Margaret's voice trembled on the other end. "Emma, maybe I should just go to a nursing home. I can't remember anything anymore." Lisa wasn't only draining her money, she was breaking her mind, bending it until Margaret herself no longer trusted what was true. I turned into a detective, piecing together my own case against someone who shared my last name. What I uncovered was darker than theft. It was domination. I spent late nights hunched over my laptop, reviewing hours of kitchen footage. Lisa's voice filled the room through the tiny speaker. "Mom, stop thinking. Just sign here. I'll handle it." The words made my skin crawl. On the screen, Margaret sat slouched, pen wobbling in her hand, her confusion written all over her face. Lisa guided the pen with a smile that looked almost tender to anyone else, but to me, it was predatory. Another clip showed Lisa rifling through Margaret's filing cabinet while she napped on the couch. Drawers opened, papers shuffled, envelopes tucked into her purse. Margaret snored softly in the background, unaware her life was being dismantled one signature, one document at a time. I began accompanying Margaret to her doctor's appointments, sitting beside her as the neurologist ran memory tests. When the doctor gently asked if she could manage her finances alone, Margaret looked at the floor. The neurologist later handed me a formal letter. Margaret did not have the capacity to make major financial decisions. That letter became a cornerstone of my file. Confessionally, I'll admit I was terrified. I wasn't just building a folder of evidence, I was building a weapon. And if I swung it too early, Lisa could destroy everything. Shred documents, move money, or worse, manipulate Margaret into doubting me. But the evidence kept stacking higher. In Margaret's kitchen trash, I found business cards from 2 Portland real estate agents. Lisa wasn't just accessing funds, she was preparing to sell the roof over her mother's head. Then the bank statement hit me like a punch, a $50,000 home equity line of credit drawn against Margaret's house. Lisa's signature sat beside Margaret's shaky scrawl. I logged every incident, 47 in total. Times Lisa pressured Margaret, times she coached her, times she dismissed her memory as if it were a stubborn child's tantrum. Each entry in my notebook felt like a nail in the coffin Lisa was building for herself. Then came the letter. Buried under a pile of old magazines on Margaret's dining table, I found a crisp envelope from her financial advisor, dated 2 months earlier. It warned of unusual withdrawal patterns and requested a meeting. The envelope had been opened. When I called the advisor, his voice hardened. Margaret never showed up. Instead, her daughter called me, said she was handling her mother's affairs now, told me to stop sending letters. My stomach twisted. Lisa wasn't just manipulating her mother, she was intercepting every lifeline that might have protected her. The worst moment came when I arrived unannounced one afternoon. Through the window, I saw Lisa gripping Margaret's shoulders, shaking her. "You signed it, Mom. Stop acting stupid. You're making me look like the bad guy." Margaret's sobs cut through the glass. I threw the door open, and just like that, Lisa's rage melted into a smile. "Oh, Emma, Mom's just having a rough day." The mask was back on, but the damage was already done. That night, surrounded by piles of papers, USB drives, and my shaking hands, I realized I had almost everything. Proof of lies, proof of coercion, proof of fraud. But one piece remained. I needed Lisa to confess with her own voice, so I texted her, casual as I could manage. "Coffee this weekend? Just us girls." When she agreed, I slipped a recording device into my jacket pocket. This time, I wasn't going as family. I was going as a witness. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, the kind of cozy place where strangers shared quiet mornings. I sat at a corner table, latte in hand, my heart pounding beneath the calm smile I forced across my face. When Lisa walked in, she looked polished. Fresh blouse, gold hoops, nails lacquered deep red, as if she hadn't spent the last few months hollowing out her mother's life. I started gently, stirring my coffee as though this was just another sister-in-law chat. "Lisa, I've noticed Margaret seems a little confused lately about financial stuff," I said, my tone light, careful. She barely blinked. "Oh, she wanted this. The house, the accounts, everything. She's worried about taxes and just wants to make sure I'm taken care of." Her voice was smooth, too smooth. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "But what about David? Did she change her will? I mean, wasn't he supposed to inherit half?" For the first time, her mask cracked. "David!" she snapped, leaning forward. "David doesn't need money. He's the golden child with his military career. He's fine. I'm the one Mom worries about." Inside, I felt a rush of anger, but I kept my expression soft, sympathetic. I leaned in, lowered my voice. "Maybe you're right, Lisa. Maybe it is better this way. Margaret is getting worse, and someone has to manage things." Her shoulders relaxed. A smile tugged at her lips. She sipped her coffee like we had just reached a sisterly understanding. "Finally, someone who gets it. Between you and me, David doesn't need to know all the details. Mom's taken care of, and honestly, after everything I've done for this family, I deserve some security too." Every word was captured by the recorder hidden in my jacket. I forced myself to nod even as my stomach clenched. She wasn't talking about care. She was talking about entitlement. Then her phone rang. She answered, voice bright. "Yes, hi. About the listing. We're thinking $925,000. The market's hot. I want to close before winter." My pulse spiked. She wasn't just taking Margaret's assets. She was planning to sell the house Margaret still lived in. When she hung up, I raised an eyebrow. Lisa smirked, unashamed. "Mom will need memory care soon anyway. Better to liquidate now while the value's high." She said it as casually as if she were discussing a grocery list. Confessionally, I'll admit it took everything I had not to throw the latte in her face. The idea of Margaret, confused, fragile, still walking those rooms filled with family memories, being tossed out for a profit, made me sick. But instead of lashing out, I smiled. I hugged her goodbye, my arms stiff, my hands trembling as I patted her back. Walking to my car, I felt the recorder press against my side like a secret weapon. For weeks, I'd been collecting pieces of a puzzle. Now I had the final piece. Lisa's own voice, her own plan, her own greed. That night, I spread the evidence across my dining table. Videos, texts, bank records, the doctor's letter, and now the recording. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I'd researched weeks earlier. "Patricia Chen, elder law attorney," the voice answered. I didn't hesitate. "My name is Emma Richardson. I need help. My sister-in-law has stolen everything from my mother-in-law." The war had begun. Patricia Chen's office smelled like old books and polished wood. She spread my evidence across her desk, photos, recordings, documents, like pieces of a trial already won. She tapped one manicured finger against the stack. "Emma, this is one of the clearest cases of elder exploitation I've seen in 20 years. Her words should have reassured me. Instead, they made my pulse quicken. Clear or not, this was family. The numbers were staggering. Margaret's $890,000 house, $340,000 across 3 accounts, $28,000 worth of jewelry, and a $50,000 home equity loan already drawn. Nearly $1.3 million under Lisa's control. Patricia's plan was swift. Emergency guardianship, immediate asset freeze, civil suit for undue influence. We had to act before Lisa drained the accounts or pushed the house onto the market. When we told Margaret, she cried with relief, clutching my hands. I knew something was wrong, Emma, but Lisa kept telling me I was crazy. I thought maybe I was. That moment still burns in my chest. Margaret's tears weren't just grief. They were vindication. But Lisa didn't crumble. She retaliated. 2 days after the filing, Margaret called me sobbing. 2 men came to the house. They said they were from Adult Protective Services. They told me you were trying to lock me away, that you wanted my money. Lisa said you were the one exploiting me. My grip on the phone tightened. Fake investigators. Lisa had staged a performance to turn her mother against me. When I drove to Margaret's house, Lisa was already there. She stood in the doorway like a guard. "You need to leave," she said, her voice flat, eyes daring me to step forward. "Margaret needs me," I tried, but Lisa's body blocked the frame. "This is my house now. Mom doesn't want to see you. If you don't leave, I'll call the cops and report you for harassment." Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Margaret on the couch, shoulders curled inward, her face pale with fear. Lisa slammed the door so hard it rattled the frame. Confessionally, I'll admit I stood there shaking, not just from anger, but from doubt. Lisa's lies were venomous, and Margaret was vulnerable enough to believe them. I began to wonder if I'd waited too long, if Lisa had already poisoned her mother against me beyond repair. That night, my inbox lit up with an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "Evidence you need to see." Inside were photos of me entering Margaret's home, close-ups of the hidden camera I'd installed, and screenshots of texts between David and me. The message was short. "You think you're so smart, little sister? Who's really exploiting an old woman? Me or the daughter-in-law secretly recording her? See you in court." My stomach turned to stone. Lisa wasn't just stealing money. She was stealing the narrative, framing me as the villain. 2 days later, Patricia slammed her briefcase shut. "We can't wait. I've pushed for an emergency hearing. You're in front of Judge Morrison in 48 hours. Everything hinged on what the court believed. The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber, and every sound in the courtroom seemed to vanish. Lisa sat across from me, posture straight, smile sharp, as if she had already claimed victory. Her attorney leaned forward with polished confidence, the picture of control. He began with a voice as smooth as glass. "Your Honor, this is not elder exploitation. This is a misunderstanding fueled by a daughter-in-law with ulterior motives. Mrs. Richardson has always trusted her daughter, Lisa, with her affairs. Emma is inserting herself where she doesn't belong because she knows there's an inheritance at stake." His words sliced through the air. He painted me as greedy, scheming, the outsider threatening to dismantle a family. I clenched my hands together. Across the aisle, Lisa tilted her head, her smirk widening. Patricia rose, steady and deliberate. "Your Honor, what you just heard is a story. What I will show you are facts." She placed the neurologist's letter on the judge's desk. This letter confirms that during the period Lisa Richardson obtained these transfers, Margaret Richardson lacked the cognitive capacity to make complex financial decisions. And yet, hundreds of thousands of dollars were moved, properties were reassigned, and debts were created in her name. We played recordings next. Lisa's voice spilled out. "Mom, just sign here. You're so forgetful. I'll handle it for you." Margaret's voice, frail and uncertain, whispered back, "I don't know, Lisa. I don't think—" The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. On the stand, Lisa tried to hold her ground. Her lawyer guided her. "Lisa, did your mother ask for your help?" "Yes," she said sweetly. "She wanted me to manage things. She worried about losing money to scams. I was protecting her." But Patricia pressed harder. And the house? The bank accounts? Lisa's tone sharpened. Mom begged me. David has his career, his benefits. She wanted me safe. Patricia's next move was the dagger. She loaded the kitchen footage, projected onto the courtroom screen. There it was. Margaret at the kitchen table, eyes clouded. Lisa leaning over, papers spread. Stop thinking, Mom, just sign. The pen slipped in Margaret's hand. Lisa grabbed it, guided it across the signature line. Margaret's protest, I don't know, Lisa, I don't think, was cut off by Lisa's hissed command, just sign. The room froze. The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. Even Lisa's attorney shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. For the first time, Lisa's smile cracked. Confessionally, I'll admit I almost cried, not from sadness, but from relief. I had doubted myself 1,000 times. Now the truth was projected for everyone to see. During recess, I slipped into the courthouse bathroom. The mirror caught my pale face. Then the door creaked open. Lisa stood behind me, eyes burning. She stepped closer, voice low. If you win, I'll ruin your marriage. David will know what you are. A manipulator who tricked her way into this family. He'll never forgive you. She brushed past me, leaving her venom in the air. Back in the courtroom, Patricia delivered her closing with unflinching precision. Your Honor, this is elder abuse. The evidence is clear. Undue influence, coercion, and exploitation. Margaret deserves protection. Judge Morrison's ruling came like stone. Emergency guardianship is granted to Emma Richardson, effective immediately. All transfers executed after Margaret Richardson's dementia diagnosis are hereby frozen. Furthermore, a criminal investigation will be opened into possible elder abuse and fraud. Lisa Richardson is to have no contact with her mother until further notice. Lisa shot up, trembling. This is insane. She's my mother. Her voice cracked as bailiffs approached. You can't do this to me. They escorted her out, her protests echoing off the walls. Margaret leaned against me, whispering, "Thank you," though her eyes were heavy with grief. The gavel fell again, final and merciless. I had guardianship. The assets were safe for now. But as I watched Lisa being pulled from the courtroom, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the first battle in a much longer war. 3 days after the hearing, the military phone rang in the middle of the night. I pressed it to my ear, static hissing. Then David's voice cut through. Em, I got an emergency message to call home. What's happening? Is Mom okay? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All the weight of the last weeks, Lisa's manipulation, the court battle, the sight of Margaret trembling on the witness stand, crashed over me. How do you tell your husband, a Marine in a combat zone, that his sister nearly stole his mother's life savings, that his family had turned into a battlefield? David, I whispered, it's bad. Lisa. She transferred Mom's house, emptied accounts. We went to court. I have guardianship now. Silence stretched across thousands of miles. Then I heard him inhale sharply. You're telling me my sister did that to Mom? His voice cracked, raw. And you fought it alone? I explained everything in clipped sentences. The deed transfer, the forged bank access, the hidden camera footage, the neurologist's letter. Every word felt like pressing glass into a wound. David said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, I don't know whether to thank you or to scream, but I know one thing. You saved Mom, and I'll never forget that. When the call ended, I sat in the dark living room with Margaret asleep down the hall. The house was quiet, but my heart thundered. This wasn't over. Patricia wasted no time. She filed a civil suit for financial exploitation, demanding full restitution and damages. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation. Lisa now faced the possibility of felony charges, prison time, and financial ruin. Margaret moved into our guest room. At first she seemed nervous, afraid she was imposing, but within weeks the change was remarkable. Without Lisa's daily pressure, her memory stabilized. She laughed more. She ate better. One afternoon she folded laundry beside me and said, Emma, I feel like I can breathe again. Still, the numbers were grim. Lisa had drained $87,000 from Margaret's accounts before the freeze. Casino withdrawals, credit card payments, luxury purchases, all gone. Patricia warned me we might never recover that money, but the principal mattered more than the balance. Settlement talks began. Lisa's attorney reached out, suggesting Lisa would return what she could if we dropped criminal charges. Patricia's response was firm. Accountability isn't optional. If we let this slide, she'll do it again, to someone else's mother, if not yours. The negotiations dragged on. Then one morning, Patricia called with a new revelation. Lisa confessed something during discussions. Years ago, before your father-in-law passed, she forged checks from his account. Margaret discovered it, but covered for her out of shame. She couldn't bring herself to expose her own daughter. I sank into a chair, dizzy. It explained so much. The fear in Margaret's eyes, the way she second-guessed herself, the silence that had always hovered between her and Lisa. This wasn't Lisa's first betrayal. It was just the first one Margaret couldn't hide anymore. Weeks later, I received a letter in the mail, 8 pages, written in Lisa's uneven handwriting. The first line stopped me cold. I don't expect forgiveness. She rambled about her debts, her gambling, the constant feeling of being second best to David. She admitted she had lied to herself, told herself Mom would want her to have the money anyway. She wrote about watching the courtroom footage of herself pressuring Margaret and said, "I didn't recognize that person. I've become a monster." Near the end, her words softened. "Please just take care of Mom. She deserves better than me. I know I've lost her. Maybe that's the punishment I deserve." I sat at the table, the pages trembling in my hands. Part of me wanted to rip them in half. Another part wanted to tuck them away for Margaret someday. Confession or manipulation. It was impossible to tell. Finally, the day of the settlement hearing arrived. Lisa entered the courtroom in a plain gray suit, shoulders slumped, her bravado gone. She didn't look at me, didn't look at David, didn't even look at Margaret. The terms were read aloud. Lisa would return all assets still in her possession. She would set up a restitution plan for the $87,000 she'd spent. She would undergo mandatory rehab for gambling addiction, 5 years probation, and a permanent restraining order from Margaret. The judge asked if she agreed. Lisa nodded once, barely audible. As we left, Margaret leaned on my arm, her voice breaking. "She's still my daughter, Emma." I didn't know what to say, because she was right, and yet she wasn't. Confessionally, I'll admit that was the hardest moment. Harder than the courtroom, harder than the threats, harder than the evidence. Watching a mother still love the child who had betrayed her in every way, that was the real punishment. Not for Lisa, for Margaret. And as I held Margaret close, walking her out of that courthouse, I realized this battle had scarred all of us. The war hadn't ended, it had simply changed shape. David came home on a gray October afternoon, the kind of day when the air smelled faintly of rain. He walked through the door still in uniform, his face harder, older, but his eyes softening the moment they landed on his mother. Margaret stood with her arms out, frail but determined, and he crossed the room in 3 strides. He held her close, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I'm sorry I wasn't here." Margaret shook her head. "You're here now." For a long time, they didn't let go. Watching them, I felt the fracture in our family begin in some small way to knit itself closed. The court finalized guardianship in my name, and Margaret's house was legally returned. She chose to sell it. Too many ghosts haunted those rooms. The sale closed at $905,000, money secured in a trust for her future. Banks released what they could. $253,000 restored to her accounts. Her jewelry, at least the pieces we tracked down, was returned, and Lisa, bound by the court's ruling, was ordered to repay the $87,000 she had already drained. That restitution will take years, but the number itself no longer carried the same weight. Margaret moved into an assisted living community with wide windows and gardens she could walk through at sunrise. For the first time in months, she seemed lighter. She joined a knitting circle. She laughed with neighbors over tea. One day she told me, "It feels like I'm living again, not just surviving." Seeing her in that place, safe and thriving, reminded me why every sleepless night had been worth it. Lisa, meanwhile, faded into a different kind of silence. She entered rehab, supervised visits with counselors, probation meetings scheduled like clockwork. I never saw her. The only traces came in the form of letters, passed through her therapist. Some Margaret read, some she tucked away unopened. The words inside were heavy, half confessions, half pleas, sentences that swung between anger and sorrow. One line stayed with me. "I don't expect forgiveness. Just make sure Mom is safe." For David, the return home wasn't simple. He carried fury like a second skin. "She's my sister," he would mutter at night, staring at the ceiling. "How could she do this to Mom?" I learned not to answer. Some questions can't be answered. They can only be endured. Over time, his anger didn't vanish, but it softened into something quieter. A grief for the sister he once had, the family he thought was unshakable. As for me, the lessons didn't arrive as neat bullet points. They came in fragments like reflections I couldn't ignore. I understood now that the small knot in your stomach, the one you try to dismiss as paranoia, often knows the truth before you're ready to face it. I understood that silence is a shield abusers count on, and that breaking that silence, even when it feels like betrayal, is the only way to protect someone vulnerable. I understood the power of proof. Photos, recordings, signatures on paper. Memory can be bent, twisted, erased. Evidence can't. And I learned something about loyalty, something no one ever tells you. Real loyalty isn't standing by someone just because they share your blood. Real loyalty is standing between the vulnerable and the person hurting them, no matter how much it tears at the family tree. Loving Margaret meant being willing to stand against Lisa. Loving David meant risking his anger to protect the mother he adored. The hardest lesson came last. I saw that forgiveness and consequences aren't opposites. Margaret still whispers, "She's my daughter," when Lisa's name comes up. Love doesn't vanish, even when it's bruised and broken, but boundaries remain. Lisa can write her letters, sit in her therapy sessions, rebuild piece by piece. She can be loved by her mother and still live with the weight of her choices. Justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is about truth and protection. On Margaret's 77th birthday, her new community held a small celebration. Candles flickered on a frosted cake, neighbors sang, and she laughed. A real laugh, unclouded, free. Watching her in that moment, I realized the war we had fought wasn't just for money or property or legal rulings. It was for this: a woman's peace, her dignity, her right to end her life surrounded not by fear, but by safety. That is the ending that mattered. And if you're listening to this, I'd love to know where you are in the world. Leave me a comment below and don't forget to subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it reminds me that protecting the vulnerable is never wasted. Thank you for being here and for listening.